everyone, Kevin P. McAuliffe here for lowpost.com, and I'm back again with the next lesson in our Scratch Essentials series, and today we're talking about the ColorFX module. More specifically, I want to get in and talk about the Layers tab, how we're going to get in, work with it, what it does, and how you can utilize it to create very specific grades and effects inside of your Scratch projects. Alright, so let's Command or Alt and Tab into Assimilate Scratch, and we are on our Scratch Essentials project. I'm just going to enter the project. Now you'll see that we are at the construct window. We're not going to be spending too much time in here or in the edit module for that matter. We'll just spend a little bit of time in there off the top and then move into the ColorFX module in a minute or two. Now what I want to do is I want to head to the edit module right off the bat, because there's a couple things that I do want to talk about in here first. Now you'll notice on the left side we have our layers panel, right side we actually have the metadata panel. We should be on the versions panel because this is really the default layout for how things will be when you call up these two windows. Now I'm actually kind of glad that the metadata window was up on the right hand side, because we do, I'm going to commonly refer to this as the layers panel and the versions panel. However, there are other panels in both of these windows, like the front panel and the matte panel with layers, and the nodes, the staging, the metadata, and output over here with versions. Now the one thing that I like having access to the metadata right here is that we can get in and add metadata, change metadata, and even delete metadata without having to constantly go back to the construct window, which is super helpful. Now, let's come to our timeline for a second here. Now, you'll notice that I actually have color bars off the top, and you'll see why I have that in just a second. You'll see that as I drag through and we get to video layer 2, and it's going to start to come into play like such, fade in, but something's actually going on here, because if you take a look, what's actually happening is that layer 2 is not fading in, and layer 3 is not fading in. So what exactly is going on here? Why are these layers not fading in? Well, what I need to do is I need to draw your attention to a parameter that can be switched on and off so that you can isolate layers and see only the footage that you need to see at any given time. What I've done is I've actually isolated layer 1, and that's why we're only seeing it and nothing else is fading in. And that parameter is located right here. It's the main output / full context parameter. And what the difference is that the toggle turned on is going to show us all of the layers, basically the composite of all the layers here that are in my timeline. Now if I want to get in and isolate any layer in particular, we're going to be isolating video track 2. Once I have video track 2 selected, I'm going to come in and toggle that parameter off, and now I'm only looking at the clips on layer 2. Okay? So the next thing that I want to bring to your attention is something that is called the barcode. Now you probably know a barcode from products that you buy at the store. You flip them over, they got the barcode on the back. Well, the barcode inside of Scratch works a little bit differently, and it's located right here at the bottom of the canvas. Now you'll see that as soon as I hover over, what this is going to do is toggle on the primary, secondary, layers, and framing parameters from what we're going to be doing inside of the ColorFX module. Now, what's important to keep in mind is that right now you'll notice that I actually have one of those bars filled or active, and that's the primary parameter. Now, why would I have the primary parameter active right when I step into a project? Well, the reason is that because I've actually applied a LUT to this footage, and a LUT is considered to be a primary grade. Now, I applied the LUT back in the construct window in the media browser in the grade tab. You'll notice over here, there it is, log C2 rec 709, and I also in here actually have a barcode that shows me that the grade is active. So let's head down, let's say OK, and I think we're ready now to jump over to the ColorFX module. Now what I want to do here is just bring the canvas down ever so slightly. We're going to hide our versions over on the right, make sure our layers are showing over on the left, and we are dealing with just the clips that we want to be dealing with, which are on video track number 2. Very nice. Okay. Now you remember I said that a LUT edition is a primary grade, and I know this because if you take a look over here on the left hand corner, the lower left hand corner, you'll see that I have the media parameter active right now, and in here is where our LUT has been added. That is why it's appearing as a primary change to our footage. Now, something else I do want to draw to your attention is the fact that in the upper left-hand corner of all the tools that we have inside the ColorFX module, we have something called QuickTime, and we can come in and change its video levels from video to full. Now you might be thinking, well, that seems to be a very one-trick pony. Well, what this parameter actually does is change based on the footage that you have selected in your timeline. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to come back to video track number 1. What we're going to do is make sure that track's isolated, and I'm going to come all the way back to the beginning to those color bars. And as I get to the color bars, I want you to watch what happens to that QuickTime parameter. It changes to be a color frame. What I'd like to do is to change those bars back to being a color frame of black, and you'll now see in the edit module that is a black frame now off the top of our edit. Okay, let's come back to the ColorFX module. Let's now come in, make sure we're dealing with video track number 2. Very nice. And this is the shot that we're going to be working with pretty much for the rest of this lesson. So let's talk about layers and what they are and what they actually do, because as self-explanatory as they seem, they might not be as straightforward as you think. So what can you do with layers? Well, with layers you can create unlimited layers on top of a source shot and its primary grade. Now, that's all fine and good, but what exactly can a layer contain? Well, a layer can contain its own color grade, shape, softness, color qualifier, animation, fill, matte, and even tracking. So let's start out with something basic. Why don't we add a vignette to our footage? So to do this, the very first thing we want to do is come down to our canvas. We're going to add a new circle to our canvas. We're going to add a new circle to our canvas, and you'll notice that I didn't create a layer right off the bat. However, as soon as I added this shape on the canvas, you'll see a layer was created for me automatically. And before I get in and actually start changing the shape of the circle, I want to add the vignette or make the primary grade change so that we can see the vignette so you get a very visual idea of what's happening here. So let's head to our balance. I'm going to come to the primary offset or the master offset. We're just going to drag that very far south, and you'll notice that what's being adjusted is inside the circle, not exactly what I'm looking for here. So let's head back to the canvas. Let's invert this shape that we just made, and let's now get in and adjust its softness by twirling clockwise here. I want to make it pretty soft. Out to about there I think is good. Let's adjust our shape out to the edges of the frame like such. Very nice. I'm going to hold Option and I'm going to mouse wheel back so that we can change the position, just so we can make sure that this vignette is going to look exactly the way that we want it to look. And basically what we've now done is created this vignette all set to go, and it was a fairly quick process to do it. Now, let's talk about toggling this on and off, because sometimes you don't want to see it necessarily on the layer. You'd like to bypass everything. Well, that's where the layer toggle on off or active and inactive comes into play. We can turn that on and off. Now, you'll notice as well, there's another parameter beside it called recursive mode. Now, I'm going to get to that in just a second because it's a very interesting way to work and a very clever way to work, and something that when I discovered how it worked, I thought was something that I'm going to be working with and using all the time. Okay, now I want to show you one other thing in here, and what I'd like to do is add another layer. Now for this layer, what we want to do is we want to make sure that this layer is called vignette. Okay, and what we're going to do is create a new layer, and I'm just going to call this crazy grade. Okay, and with crazy grade, what we're going to do is we're going to head back to our balance. I'm just going to drag the red all the way up. Okay, now I'm just going to bypass that layer for just 1 second, and you'll notice that basically what has happened is that it is almost like, and I'm just going to take the vignette here and just drag that even farther south, that this layer of red has just been placed directly over top of everything, and it's trickling down to the layers below it, which is the way this works. Don't think of vignette as the topmost layer. Crazy grade is actually the topmost layer. You'll see that I can toggle it off. I can even come in and toggle the vignette off so that you can see what this looks like with just the red there. Now the reason I wanted to draw this to your attention is because at any time I can select one of these layers and I can pull it away from the stack and then replace it where I want it to go, in our case, before we actually do the vignette. Now you're going to notice it's not going to make that much of a difference because in this case it's really not that big of a change. But in situations where you've come in and you've done transfer modes, grades, keys, and all that type of stuff, changing the stacking order can drastically change what your composite or your grade looks like. Now, speaking of composite modes, let's talk about front and briefly matte for just 1 second, because what we now have the ability to do, and I'm just going to turn the vignette off for a second here, is we now have the ability to come to the front tab, and you'll see that we can now come in and have complete access to transfer modes or blending modes. So for example, we could do this as an overlay transfer mode to give our footage a very different look. Of course, we could get in and add a canvas, get in, draw a shape, isolate areas, do whatever we want to do by simply adding it to this specific layer. Now, if this layer had a matte channel with it, what we could do is get into the matte section or the matte tab and get in and choose between none, over, additive, or subtractive matte modes in here to create the matte look that we want to create. Okay, now this is just a very basic primer for how layers works, but there's something else that's important that I show you, and we're just going to come back because we're going to talk about the recursive mode on and off and how this works. Now, to do this, what I'm going to do is actually delete both of these grades. Let's just delete both those layers. Let's create a new layer, and we're going to call this primary colors. Okay, and you're going to see where I'm going with this in just a second. Now, the reason I'm calling it primary colors is we're going to come down to the canvas. We are going to come into the circle shape. I'm just going to adjust its size down to about there, I think. Let's reposition it here. And we're going to call this layer, and what I should have done is not call it primary colors. Let's call this layer red. Okay. What we're going to do is come to the balance. I'm just going to grab red, crank it way up. Okay, I think that's pretty good right about there. Let's now come in. Let's add a new layer. We're going to call it blue. We're going to do the exact same thing. Come to canvas. I'm just going to add a circle, adjust its size. I think that's pretty good. We're going to come back to our balance. I'm going to grab blue, drag it way up. Let's reposition this layer and let's overlap it like such. Okay. Now, last but certainly not least, let's add that last layer. Of course, we're going to call this green. Once green is applied, let's come back to our canvas. Exactly the same thing again. Circle. We're going to take it. We're going to shrink it right down here. Let's make sure we grab the actual corner. Perfect. Right to about there, I think. We're going to come to the balance, take that green, grab it way up. Now, what's important to keep in mind is I should probably actually make these even brighter, just so they stand out a little bit better from the background. So let's just come back to blue. We'll just crank that all the way up. Red, crank it all the way up. Now, what's important to keep in mind is that it's not the colors that are important here. It's how these different layers interact with each other. And this is where the recursive mode comes into play. What we're going to do is we're going to, with the green circle, I'm going to turn recursive mode off. Now you're going to notice that what's happening, let's just click somewhere else in the canvas here, is that these layers are actually transparent. So I can see through this layer to the layer behind it because these are overlapping each other. Okay, so basically this is overlapping, overlapping. We can see through all the layers to each layer below it. But what if I wanted each layer to act as more or less sort of a layer that's completely solid that's appearing over top of it, and any layer that appears behind it is going to stop based on what the layer in front of it is doing. So this is how this works. I'm going to turn recursive mode off for the green layer and take a look at what happens immediately. Nothing has changed as far as what I've done as far as the grade, the transfer mode, anything like that. The only thing that has changed is now those layers and those canvases specifically that are behind this canvas don't appear where this one fills the screen. Okay? If you take a look at blue, this is still transparent. We can still see through it to red, but if we were to come in and turn recursive mode off, we now have a very specific stacking order that gives these layers complete control over the space that only they occupy, not dealing with the overlapping space, only the space that they occupy on the screen. So this is a very cool parameter, a very cool feature, and a very interesting way to work. It gives you a lot of control over what is going to be seen as far as the different layers and the different grades that go along with them. All right, I think that's a good place to leave off in this lesson. Coming up in part 2, we're going to talk about the version panel, how that works and how it works in conjunction with your layers to give you the looks and grades that you need to get. All right, now as always, if you have any questions, you have any comments, or ideas for upcoming lessons or courses, I want you to head on over and post them in our forums at lowpost.com/forums. And if you have any questions for me, you can always send them to kevinpmcauliffe@gmail.com.